Hello everyone, and today we're going to be doing a hummingbird animation. And by doing that, I'm going to be able to show you a lot of really powerful things in After Effects for animation, and just how well it does with animating objects, especially ones made in Illustrator and Photoshop, and parenting the motion sketch, using expressions, really simple expressions that there's no typing or coding required. So it's going to be really cool. And I'm going to show you the final animation that I made already. And we're going to be doing something like this today. Okay, so here's the general animation. Obviously the wings look weird, but they're flapping so quickly. They look kind of stroby, but that's what's going on here. Is there's no motion blur happening, and motion blur is really powerful in conveying a sense of speed. And so if I turn that on, and I'll show you how to do this later, but I just want to turn it on and show you what happens. Okay, so here it is with motion blur turned on, and right away you can see how that conveys a sense of really high speed, which I think is really helpful to show, especially for hummingbird wings, just how fast they're flapping. And it's actually really easy to get them to flap that fast, and also really easy to change the animation without having to really go back and do a lot of keyframes. So I'll show you how to do that too. There's the puppet tool is going on in the way the head moves. The body's rotating a little bit, and there's a back tail is going up and down. There's a lot of subtle things going on in this animation, and all those things are going to be helpful just in general for animating things in the future. And we're going to go through all of them. So first of all, I'm going to start with the beginning. Now there's no animation on this yet, and it's just the Illustrator file that I brought in. Now here's the Illustrator file that I created and brought into After Effects. And you can see right here in the layers, I've got it separated out into a bird body. There's the front wing, the back wing, the back tail, and just the foliage, the flowers. So it's important that these are all separated out into layers, because when I bring them into After Effects, I'll show you what happens. So just to show you the process, I'll re-import the Hummingbird Illustrator file. Now when I do that, when I select this file, and this is the standard for any file that gets imported, by default, it says import as footage. Now, what that doesn't... Now, if you did that, if you imported this Illustrator file as footage, look what happens. It comes in as just one file. And if I open it up, I can't move anything around. It's all one image. These are all collapsed together, and I can't control them. Now if I go back to importing and I import the file again, and instead I change it to composition retain layer sizes, it's going to import this as a composition already. So when I do that, this shows up. And if I open it up, all of these layers have been retained, and the size of the document in Illustrator also gets transferred over. So it's very helpful. And so now I can control these layers like this. It's very helpful. So I'm going to close that. I'm just going to delete this because I've already got it imported. Okay, So now we're in the beginning. This file's been imported. All I really did instead to add to this file was I just made a white solid to be in the background. And by doing that, all I have to do is just go to Layer, New, Solid. And all a solid is just it's a layer of a color, and it's set to the size of the composition. So when I hit OK, this happens. Solids can be really powerful. But for this purpose, all it really is right now is just a solid color, and it's white. So that's all I've really added to this file. And we can start with setting up the bird body to be the parent of all these objects. And what that means is when I move the bird body right now, this happens. So I'm going to want this to be the main driver for the animation. I want this stuff to move with it, and right now it's not. That's because it's not parented. These layers, the tail and the wings, aren't parented to the body. So the first thing we're going to do is just select these three layers, the front wing, the back wing, and the back tail, and go to the parent pick whip and make these the children of the bird body. So now when I move the bird body around, everything moves around. It's great. And so this bird body is going to be the thing that flies in like this and goes in here and does all that. And then we can animate the wings and the back tail separately, and they'll move with the bird body. It's very nice. But what I want to do first before that is make sure the anchor point for the bird body is in a good spot, because right now it's right here. This is the anchor point. So what that means is if I was going to rotate this layer, the bird body, it rotates around the anchor point like that. And that's okay. Like that's a okay approximation of really the kind of center of gravity of this bird. That's kind of like where the bird would move from and do all of its movements. But I kind of think actually it should be around more near the stomach. And so what you have to do to move this anchor point to where you want is just go over here to this tool. It's called the pan behind or the anchor point tool. And the shortcut for that is Y. And so once you have that tool selected, you can just drag this anchor point really anywhere you want. And that becomes the anchor point for this layer. If I was going to move it to be like right here, and then now I would rotate this layer, it rotates around that anchor point like that. So I want to make sure the anchor point is in a good spot. It kind of mimics the center of gravity of this bird, and I kind of feel like it should be right here. So I'm going to put it right there, and now when I rotate it, it rotates around there. So like when it goes to dip its head into the flower, you know, the body kind of moves around that point. And I think that's really accurate for the body. Next thing we're going to do is set the anchor points for the wings and the tail. So if we go to the front wing and rotate it, it rotates around that point, which obviously is not where the wing rotates on a hummingbird. And so same thing here, just take the anchor point tool. I'm going to put it right kind of at the end of the wing right here, right there. So now when I rotate this, that seems more accurate. Rotates right around there. So that's great. Same with the back wing. Put it right near that same area. Right there. That's great. And now the back tail. And put that really kind of just around there. I think that's a good spot where the pivot point would be on that wing, on that tail. I think that's good. Okay, great. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some pins to this bird body to give it the ability to let the head move around and everything by using the puppet pin tool. And it's right up here. Now, you see this push pin icon. And what that is if you click on that layer, you get these yellow dots like this. Now I'm just going to add these three, and I'm just going to really use this one to animate. See, now when you grab it like that, for right now, it doesn't move the whole layer. It just moves this part. And we can actually expand it, but this is what you're really going for. Now, if I only had that one pin selected, if I only put one pin on this layer and I just wanted this one to move, this is what happens. Because it assumes, because there's no other pins on the layer, this one is in control of the whole layer. That's why I want to add more pins. It's not really to animate, but just to kind of pin down these parts of the body so that only this part moves. So once again, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to start down here and then get one right here and then get one right here. And so by moving just this one, these will keep the layer in place. And it actually kind of bends in kind of a nice way too. So that's all we want to do, is really just have the head move. And these other two pins right here are just keeping the layer in place. So right now that's pretty good, except for the expansion, which we'll get to. And that's right down here. So if you go into the bird body layer, automatically when you have the puppet pin tool like that, it adds an effect called puppet, and then it inside the mesh drop down, and then inside that is the deform drop down. That's where the actual pins are. And there's also this setting right here called expansion, and by default it's set to 3, which is basically the radius around the pin that affects the layer. And so that's why it's not grabbing this stuff right here, because the expansion isn't high enough. And so I'm just going to drag this up to around 200, just kind of arbitrary. And now you can see how it does that. And it's actually a little bit too high. If I bring it down, let's see. See, if I bring it down, that's what's happening. So the expansion basically ends right there. If I increase the expansion, it'll grab that little tail. See how it's slowly being affected by the puppet tool as I increase the expansion? And so once I get to about 150, everything is now being controlled by these puppet pins. That's what you want. That's really cool. I think I'm going to add another puppet pin to the tail right here so that it doesn't move. I think right there. So now, let's see. And then one more at the end as well. There we go. A little bit of bending. If I put another one in the middle, that's pretty good. Yeah, I like that. Okay, great. And again, this is the only one we're going to be animating. Everything else is just a place to keep the layer in place. That's pretty good. Okay, so now we have the puppet pin set up. Now we can go into animating the actual bird body moving. Okay, now that we have the puppet pin set up, we can go in and now animate the bird body flying in like this. Now, there's two ways you can do it. Each way isn't better or worse than the other. There's just two ways to do it. Like many things in After Effects. So the first way is to just do the position keyframes by hand, which isn't so bad. And I can start by just expanding the position parameter for the bird body. And because everything else is parented to it, this will be the only thing that controls where the whole bird moves. So I can set a keyframe at the beginning off screen, and then you can just kind of do a rough animation of it flying in, like pausing, and go forward. It can fly down and go forward, and then stay there for a second, and then it'll fly back out. And it would pause for a second, and fly into here. Pause. Fly out. Pause. And then fly in. And pause. And then kind of pause right there, and then fly out of the screen. So in this 14 seconds, it very roughly comes in. And that's not, obviously it's rough, but you can see where it's going. And in that, there's also some tricks you can do by hand animating this. That'll make it easier. Obviously, the timing's bad. I don't like how, even though it's supposed to pause on the flower, it actually moves between those two keyframes, which is not what I wanted. Like, I wanted to just sit there. So there's a really powerful tool for this, because this is the animation path. This line right here, and that's really helpful to see. And you can see these squares along the path are actually the keyframes in the timeline, and you can edit these squares, and you can edit the way that they interact with each other and the path itself with the pen tool. And this is just like the way you would use it in Illustrator or Photoshop to draw a path. You can use those same tools to manipulate the animation path of an object. So if I just grab the pen tool and I hover over a point, it lets me remake the handles for that path. And I can take these handles and get rid of that curve and just have the bird go between both points. Now, because I did that by hand, this handle right here is really abrupt. And I can also just move this point around. And I can use the pen tool to actually add animation points or keyframes to this path. And the keyframes will show up if I'm adding points to this animation path. You can see how new keyframes get added when I add these points. So that's really helpful too. And let's see. So I don't want the bird to just kind of come in and hit that and stay. Like, I kind of ease into this path right here. Okay, it's not too bad. I don't like how it goes kind of fast and then slow without any kind of slowing down. Like that right there. That's super annoying. And that really can't be, you can't really fix that with the pen tool on the animation path. That's actually a graph editor easing problem. And I'll show you how to fix that right now. So if I highlight, and I've gone over this before with the graph editor, but if I highlight the position parameter and select this button right here, this will show up. And this is a graph of, this is the value graph. So the green is Y, and the red is the X position keyframes. So it's just a value, it's a graph of the values of the keyframes over time. And so this is the X value, this is the Y value, and they change. So Y is up and down and X is left and right. So they change based on how the bird is moving and where it's positioned in the composition. And so that's what this graph means. And there's things that can be done to edit this graph, but all we really want to do for this right now is to edit the speed of this animation and not the actual values of the X and Y coordinates. So right click on the graph. Right now it says edit value graph and the check marks is right there. So it's saying we're inside the value graph. If I go to edit speed graph, it changes to this. And these are all just velocities of the layer. It said, you know, the measurement is pixels per second. So it's basically going from 0 pixels per second to 2,500 pixels per second. That's the range of velocity it's measuring right now. And so this is why it's so abrupt right here is you can see it goes, the velocity changes from 460 pixels per second to 40. So it's very abrupt. It's like a cliff. It just goes very fast to very slow. And there's no transition in between those two velocities. And that's why it's really annoying. And all you have to do is, if you go to the selection tool, you can grab this handle and move it like that. So now, instead of abruptly changing velocities, it slowly slows down to that velocity. Like that. That's pretty nice. And you can drag this handle out to actually get more of a gradual deceleration or just slowing down of that layer. So instead of abruptly changing velocities like this between these two velocities, it slowly decelerates into that slower velocity, and that's a nice kind of pleasing animation. And that's just a principle to keep in mind. And honestly, the Hummingbird, it's not really how. Well, it's pretty natural looking, except that it's a little bit slower than it needs to be. Hummingbirds are really fast, and their movements are really kind of very exact and precise, and it travels very quickly between states, basically. So that's still too slow. I'm gonna do this. You know, that's kind of how fast it would go, I feel like. Maybe a little bit faster. So these two keyframes right here are just kind of the pause it's taking between while it's eating from the flower. So it flies in. So these two keyframes are flying towards the flower. Like that, staying in the flower, and then leaving. And so these two keyframes are the kind of flight back to seeing all the flowers, and it's obviously too slow, so I'm going to just bring that keyframe closer, and everything will happen much faster. Even closer than that. That's too fast. I think actually it flies too far as well. Now that I changed this one keyframe's position, it's going to slowly travel between both those keyframes. So what I'm going to do instead is just delete this keyframe and copy and paste this one into the playhead. So now it doesn't move at all because these are just identical keyframes. So it kind of pauses between the next animation, which is, you know, also not exactly what you want, but it's helpful to see. This is kind of like the pause area. This is where the bird pauses in the air. But I'm going to go in with the pen tool again and use the handle. Okay, so now you can see like a rough animation is developing right now. Really just kind of the placement of the bird roughly into the first flower. It comes back up, it pauses, it goes back to the other flower. That's kind of the process you would take for hand animating this animation path. And I'm just going to speed up and finish this off for you and then show you what I did by hand. Okay, that's a pretty good handmade animation path for the Hummingbird. And from there I can go into animating some rotation on the bird body, and then getting the puppet pin tool to get the head to move. So I'm going to go in to the rotation right here for the bird body, and every time it goes into a flower I just want to kind of rotate just a little bit like that. So I can use these position keyframes as a guide to know kind of when to put these rotation keyframes in. So start right here as it moves into the flower, and set a rotation keyframe right there. And I'm going to hold down Control to get a more kind of granular, it's more precise when you hold down control and click and drag on any kind of parameter, as opposed to just dragging without the control. It goes a lot in smaller increments and you can get more precise. So that's pretty nice, like that. And then obviously it'll come back out. And so I'll set another keyframe right there and then go back to around there. There we go. And then let's see, about right here again. Actually, I'm gonna not have it be that much, maybe like that. And because it kind of does this little wave, it kind of moves a little bit in the air on that hover, I kind of want to add, just to give it a little more realism, just a little touch of rotation. That's too much, obviously. There we go. That's kind of a nice little float. Maybe just a little bit more. That's nice. A nice little subtle movement. Great. So those are rotation keyframes. I'm going to start one more right here too. Kind of start down like it's flying in, and then yep, come up like that. Perfect. So it's kind of, it's leaning in, like it's kind of leaning forward, then it comes up. That's nice. Gets down, comes back up. A lot of stuff goes on right here, like a lot of nothing right here. When we get to the puppet pin tool, I'm going to add something right there, a little head movement to give it some time. And then again, these are all linear keyframes, they're all kind of abrupt. I'm just going to do something really easy and just select all these keyframes and right click, and if you go right there and do Keyframe Assistant, you have this option right here called Easy Ease, which automatically gives it kind of like the graph editor, but it gives it more of a soft interpolation between the keyframes automatically without having to go into the graph editor each time and do it by hand. It's a little bit too fast, I think. There we go. Okay. That's good. It's slowly getting to be more realistic. So now we're going to do the puppet pin animation. And then after that, we'll go into the wings and finish that up. That'll be really quick. So same thing with, now that we have this kind of basic animation made of the rotation and the position of this bird body, you can use those as a guide again for the puppet pin tool. Now when a puppet pin gets added, by default, a keyframe, you can see these right here. These just mean there's keyframes hidden inside these drop downs, but you can't animate, you can't mess with them until you expand these drop downs. But by default, when a puppet pin gets added, a keyframe gets added too. So if I expand one of these puppet pins, you can see that it's a position, there's a drop down for position and starch. Starch just means it keeps it there, it keeps it from moving. Which actually, these three puppet pins should all be starch. So I'm going to expand those and drop them down into starch, which means you can't animate them. It just keeps that feather, it keeps that section of the layer there. You can see how it goes to a red color, which means they can't be moved around at all. They're locked. Starch just means to keep it in place. So this is the one that's going to be animated, puppet pin 3. If I expand that, see by default a keyframe gets added for the position. So anything I do after that, any kind of movement that I make on this puppet pin will automatically make a keyframe. And you can see how an animation path gets created. So if I move this, it's already set up to animate. I'm just going to show you what these look like right now. That's obviously not ideal. I didn't really do that for the animation. But okay, so when the bird goes into the flower, let's start with a keyframe there of the original position. And then right there, it kind of goes into the flower. And that's actually, it's going through the flower, so even better, you can actually move this up to position the bird feather, the bird head, to be in the flower, like that. And actually over the course of the animation, it moves in the flower, so you can add a little keyframe right here to keep the head inside the flower, like that. So when it shoots back out again, make a keyframe to bring it back to kind of looking around. In this area, we'll come back to this, but we'll add some really quick head movements right here, like it's looking around for the next flower. And it goes in there, so then like that, and just have this come down. And once again, just to give it some more subtle movement. Okay, so right here, there's a pause in the animation where not much is really going on. I think right here would be a good spot to put some subtle head movements, like it's looking around for the flower to go into. So I'm going to start right here. And these are all really quick because hummingbirds, everything is really very fast and kind of twitchy. And you can just do really quick kind of things like that. That's not really good right now because it still needs to pause between movements. There we go. Just add one more. This one I don't like too much. There we go. And once again, I'm just going to select all these keyframes. I'm going to select all these keyframes and do an easy ease on them automatically so that they're not so abrupt. Great. And now the last couple of things is really just to do the wings, and this animation is set. Yeah, and that's super easy, the wings. And that'll get you, this will get you into a little bit of expressions and what expressions can do and what's possible with them. So first thing, we're going to do the front wing, and it just needs to be like a pretty good range, really. And actually, I don't like how it's going behind the body feather, like this back feather right here. It's because the bird body is actually above the front wing. So if I just drag the bird body to be behind the front wing, but in front of the back wing, that'll make it more realistic. It'll cover up that feather. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to add 2 keyframes, and they're just going to be the extreme ranges of the top and the bottom of the flapping. So like about right here, keyframe, and I'm just going to go 1 frame forward, which is control and right arrow, and make the other range like that. So right now it's just 2 keyframes. And that's it. And so it's not going to do any movement except for those 2 keyframes. But there's a really, really easy way to make this loop back and forth by using just 2 keyframes. And that's by using an expression. So by doing expressions can be complicated and they're JavaScript based. But After Effects gives you a lot of options to just do kind of automatic expressions that write themselves. You don't have to worry about having to code anything. And I'll show you how it opens up. So if you select the rotation parameter and it's animated, you can go up to the animation drop down right here and do this, add expression. Now when that happens, this text box appears, and this is where the coding would be going in JavaScript if you knew it. But luckily you don't have to. It's actually really easy, and it's right inside this right arrow right here. There's all of these pre-made JavaScript expressions that you don't have to really mess with. You can just drop in and they'll be written automatically. And so the one that I'm going to do is the loop out inside the property menu of the expression menu right here. So if you select that, loop out, and it does some JavaScript code automatically, and you're done. So what it's doing is it's cycling. It's basically infinitely cycling between both keyframes. Now it's not really doing exactly what you want, and that's because what you have to go in and do is actually change this cycle type. Now it says type equals cycle. You just have to go in and actually delete the word cycle and type in ping pong. One word, lowercase, just like that. And now it ping pongs. It just goes back and forth infinitely. It goes from this frame, it goes from this keyframe to this keyframe, and the next frame it goes back to the first one, and then back to the next one, first one, next one, first one, next one, first one, next one. And that's it. And it does it automatically without you having to do any extra keyframes or anything. And it works perfectly. And the best part is, say this is too much of a range or something, you can actually just go in and change just these two keyframes to change the ranges, and then those two keyframes will be moving. Now you see how it's not going until the keyframes start, so you just would have to drag these keyframes to the beginning like that. And there you go, automatically. Infinitely looping ping pong style animation. And that's all you got to do for the wings. So do the same thing for the back wing, and the best part is all you got to do is just select the rotation keyframe or the rotation parameter, copy that, and go to the back wing, and then just hit paste. And when you expand it, the rotation keyframes have been pasted, and the expression itself has also been pasted. And that only works because we're pasting a rotation parameter onto another rotation parameter. Obviously, we couldn't paste a rotation parameter onto the position parameter of another layer. It has to match both parameters. So now when we do it, they're both moving, but I mean they're also moving exactly in the same way. So you could either go into the second, like the back wing keyframes, either change the range or offset it by one frame, so they're constantly doing the opposite. But I'm just going to actually change the range just to give it some variety. And let's see, about right there. So now when I move this, that's pretty cool. They don't look exactly the same, and they're both flapping really quickly. Obviously, they don't look that great right now because motion blur is not turned on. And let's turn that on right now. So the first thing you got to do is tell After Effects that this layer needs to have motion blur on it. And right here is that switch. So none of these layers will have motion blur when it renders unless that switch is turned on. So just hit that, So now both the front wing and the back wing have the motion blur switch turned on. But look what happens. There still isn't any motion blur. And that's because there has to be the motion blur preview turned on as well. And this is for all layers with the switch turned on for motion blur. So now when I turn that on, you'll see how much motion blur is actually going on. And the good thing to note is this is just a preview, just for you to see in After Effects. If it was turned off and these two were turned on and you hit render, there would be motion blur in the render. This is just for you to see inside After Effects while you're working to get an idea. And it's also, if once the comp gets more complicated or there's more things going on inside the comp, this thing is going to really slow down your processing. So it's easy it's nice to have the option to turn this off to get faster preview renders in your timeline, because that'll add a lot of processing time to just to watching the playback in After Effects. Luckily, there's not enough going on in this composition to really make it a problem. Okay, so we've got that. That looks pretty cool. I think these wings could actually rotate some more. So I'm going to select these two and hit R for rotation, and I'm going to go forward so I can see what they're doing. And let's see. I'm going to make the front wing a little bit more of an extreme range. And then the back wing is pretty good like that. It's pretty good. Last thing to do is animate the tail wing to just go up and down as it goes into the flowers. So same thing that we did for the puppet pin and the body rotation. We'll just use previous keyframes as a guide to make this rotation work. Now, what's really helpful, this is when the U shortcut comes in really handy, because now there's a lot of keyframes going on, and it would be good to be able to see all of them laid out. And I just hit U. I had no layer selected, and I hit U, and now all the animated properties of every layer are revealed. So it's just the puppet pin position without having to dig down into the mesh drop down and deform drop down. It's just the puppet pins and just position and rotation. It's really nice. So you can use that as a guide to know when to animate this back tail. And so select the back tail, hit the rotation parameter, and set a keyframe. Okay, pretty good. One last thing that's annoying, which I was going to fix anyway, is there's nothing behind these flowers, so the bird's beak, shows up like it's over the foliage, which is not nice, doesn't look nice. And that's actually pretty easy to do. And one thing I wanted to show you is you can actually go back into Illustrator and have this file open and make changes to it, and it'll update in After Effects. So the first thing I want to do before that is drag this foliage to be on the top layer, So it actually goes over the beak, and you can see how it does that right there, but it's not filled in, so that the beak is still visible. So if I had it back down here, the beak goes over the flower. So I want the flower to go over the beak, so I put it at the top of the layer. So right there, that's fine. Okay, so now that the foliage layer is on top and the beak is behind it, it still needs to be filled in right here. And I'm going to do a thing that with a solid, kind of like a white solid, to do this and masking, which is a really helpful thing to know in After Effects. So I'm going to actually just select this white solid and hit Control D to duplicate it. And I'm going to bring it up right here so it covers up the bird right now, but it doesn't cover up the foliage. And if you just go to the pen tool and you have your layer, your white solid selected, or really any layer, and you have the pen tool, and you start to draw a shape, it'll automatically make a mask of that layer. And so the pen tool and the shape tool will automatically make masks on a layer if the layer is selected when you're using these tools. So, and the nice part is you can actually go and just move these points around pretty easily and add ones too. So I'm going to go really to right here. I'm going to turn off adaptive resolution in this button right here, the fast previews button. I'm going to turn it off so it doesn't get pixelated when I drag this around. Zoom in. I'm just going to add some points to this mask. And if you click and drag, you can get handles too. But I'm just going to need hard points. Great. There we go. So now if I turn off the bird layers and then the background layer, this is the white solid right now with just a kind of really rough mask on it. And then what you can do, as long as you have this layer selected and you're not inside of this other mask, I can make another one, and you can see how the color is different. That means a separate mask has been made. And then once it gets completed, it makes that mask onto that layer too. So now there's two masks on this white solid layer. And you can tell because they're in different colors. So I'll make another one right here. Great. Now if I turn the layers back on, it goes behind, the beak goes behind the flowers. There we go, perfect. Okay, I look forward to seeing what you all do with this. I hope it helps, and thank you very much.